A struggling single dad walks his daughter to school every morning, unaware that her kind new teacher is actually a millionaire searching for the one thing money can't buy: a real family. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The wind had teeth that morning, sharp and unrelenting, as it sliced through layers of threadbare cotton and hand-me-down denim. Michael Bennett pulled the collar of his faded jacket higher, his free hand stuffed deep into his pocket, while the other clutched the tiny mittened hand of his daughter. Sophie skipped beside him, her breath puffing out in little clouds, her backpack bouncing with each step. "Dad," she said, tugging on his hand, "do you think Miss Bloom will notice if I wear my snow boots all day?" Michael glanced down at the worn pink boots that barely kept the slush out. "If she does, I bet she'll think they're very fashionable." Sophie grinned, clearly satisfied with the answer. Her cheeks were flushed pink from the cold, her dark curls poking out beneath her knit hat, one of the few things that still fit from last winter. She looked up at him, her big brown eyes full of trust, unaware of how close the rent was to being overdue or how little was left in the fridge. Michael adjusted his pace to match hers, even though every step made his boots soak up more of the half-melted snow. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a pale golden glow over the quiet town. They passed shuttered shops, the gas station where he sometimes picked up side work, and the coffee shop he couldn't afford anymore, but still liked to imagine walking into, hand in hand with someone who wasn't just 7 years old. But Sophie talked enough for two. She chattered about her spelling test, about the snowflake art project, about how she was sure today would be super lucky. And maybe, just maybe, it would be. For her anyway. The school came into view, brick walls, cracked steps, and a red-painted door that Sophie ran to like it was the gateway to everything bright and new. Michael stopped at the edge of the path, watching her go, watching her wave before disappearing inside. He exhaled slowly, watching the fog of his breath drift upward. Then, with hands in his pockets and tired steps, he turned back toward the long day ahead. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that inside that school, behind a classroom door, someone else had just noticed Sophie. And her father. The classroom smelled like crayons, dry erase markers, and the faint scent of old radiator heat. 23 second graders shuffled in from morning lineup, puffy coats trailing behind them, cheeks red from the cold. At the front of the room stood a new face, a woman with posture so straight and calm it made the usual morning chaos feel almost respectful. Almost. Sophie slid into her seat, eyes wide with curiosity. She leaned over to her desk neighbor and whispered, "That's not Miss Bloom." The woman smiled at the class, her expression serene but warm. She wore a deep navy blouse, crisp and simple, tucked into a pair of slate-gray slacks. Her hair was pulled into a low, neat bun, not a strand out of place. She didn't fidget, didn't pace. She just waited, letting the class quiet itself, a feat in itself. "Good morning," she said, voice smooth, like the first page of a new book. "My name is Ms. Whitmore. I'll be your teacher for the rest of the year." Whispers flitted through the room, curiosity replacing sleepiness in young faces. Ms. Whitmore walked slowly across the front of the classroom, her heels clicking softly against the linoleum, then paused by Sophie's desk. "And what's your name?" she asked. Sophie straightened in her chair. "Sophie Bennett." Ms. Whitmore's eyes softened. "Nice to meet you, Sophie." Then, with a sweep of her gaze across the class, she added, "Nice to meet all of you." No one in that room knew much about Claire Whitmore, just that she arrived mid-year after a mysterious leave of absence by Miss Bloom, and that her resume had come directly from the superintendent's desk. She didn't offer stories about her past, didn't mention family or where she came from, but her eyes lingered on each child with care. She called them by name after just one roll call, and when she saw a cracked lunchbox or frayed backpack, her voice grew even gentler. To Sophie, she seemed like something out of the books they read in class, an almost magical visitor who stepped in just when someone needed her most. And somewhere beneath the elegance, beneath the cool control, Claire Whitmore watched Sophie closely. Because behind the little girl's eager smile, she saw something familiar, something that reminded her why she had come here in the first place. The second-floor classroom window looked out over the front walkway where parents dropped off their children, some in rushes of noise and movement. Car doors slamming, backpacks flung, hurried goodbyes. But Claire Whitmore's eyes always drifted to the same sight every morning: Michael Bennett. He never arrived in a car, just a tall figure in a worn jacket, walking hand in hand with his daughter through the cold. There was nothing showy about him, no booming voice, no flashy gestures, just a steady presence, quiet, careful, focused entirely on Sophie. Claire watched them as they came into view, her fingers loosely wrapped around a cup of cooling coffee. Sophie always skipped the last few steps toward the school door, looking back with a grin that never failed to soften her father's face. Michael would smile, not a wide smile, but the kind that flickered through the tired edges of his expression like the last warmth of a long night. Then, once she disappeared inside, he'd stand there for a few seconds more, just watching. Claire found herself holding her breath during those moments. She didn't know why. Maybe because she'd never seen anything quite so quiet and whole. The classroom behind her buzzed with the slow build of energy, coats being shrugged off, chairs scraping floors, the low hum of children swapping stories from home, but for a few extra seconds she lingered at the window. Michael turned, hands in his coat pockets, head lowered against the cold, and walked back the way he came, alone. Claire set her cup down on her desk. The bell hadn't rung yet, but she already felt the weight of the day pressing in. Still, a flicker of something stayed with her, an image of Sophie, laughing up at her father, and the way his hand tightened just slightly around hers in response. Not possessive, not distracted, just present. It had been a long time since Claire had seen something so real, and longer still since she'd let herself feel moved by it. But each morning, as the snow thickened and the air grew sharper, she found herself at the window again, waiting, watching, wondering. The lunch bell rang with its usual clatter of trays and shuffling feet, and the classroom emptied like water through a sieve. Claire stayed behind, wiping down a few desks, straightening a row of crooked crayons. She enjoyed the quiet moments between lessons, the breath before the next storm. But then she noticed a small figure still seated in the back corner of the room, her head bent, fingers nervously fidgeting with the zipper of her backpack. "Sophie?" Claire said gently, approaching her desk. Sophie looked up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi, Miss Whitmore. Aren't you going to lunch, sweetheart?" Sophie shrugged, glancing at her bag again. I think I left my lunch at home." Claire crouched beside her, lowering herself to eye level. "That happens. It's okay. Happens to grown-ups too, believe it or not." Sophie gave a small, embarrassed laugh, then quickly looked away. Claire hesitated for a breath, then reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a neatly wrapped sandwich and an apple. "Well, lucky for you, I packed extra today. Turkey and cheese. No mustard. I hate mustard. Want to share?" Sophie's eyes widened, and for a second her composure slipped. "Really?" "Of course," Claire said, setting the lunch on Sophie's desk like it was the most normal thing in the world. As Sophie unwrapped the sandwich, her hands trembled just slightly, enough for Claire to notice. The girl took small, polite bites, sitting upright like she was afraid to offend the food. Claire watched her in silence, her mind noting the worn strap on the backpack, the safety-pinned cuff on her sleeve, the way Sophie folded the sandwich wrapper afterward, like it might be used again. Claire didn't ask questions, not yet. But something inside her stirred. It wasn't just a forgotten lunch. It was the way Sophie didn't complain, didn't expect help, didn't act like she was owed anything. As Sophie finished and gave her a grateful smile, Claire reached out and gently tucked a stray curl behind the girl's ear. "Any time, Sophie. That's what teachers are for." But as the child skipped off to recess, Claire stayed rooted to the spot, a quiet ache blooming in her chest. Because this wasn't just about turkey sandwiches and forgotten lunches, this was about something deeper, something familiar, something that mattered. The key turned with a soft click, and the heavy front door opened to silence. Claire stepped inside, her heels echoing against the marble floors of the townhouse's grand entryway. She exhaled, slow and deliberate, the sound of the door shutting behind her somehow louder than it should have been. The warmth from the hallway lights didn't reach her. Not really. It never did. She slipped off her coat, hung it on a brass hook by the door, and set her leather briefcase on the side table. The house was immaculate, museum-like in its cleanliness. Not a pillow out of place, not a dish in the sink. Expensive, designed, cold. The open living room stretched before her, all muted grays and cream tones, the kind of aesthetic people paid interior designers for. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the soft glow of city lights beyond the quiet neighborhood. A glass sculpture sat on the mantel above a gas fireplace that hadn't been lit in weeks. Claire walked past it all, her fingers grazing the back of the couch but never lingering. Upstairs, she passed rooms she didn't enter. A guest bedroom with a made bed no one had ever used. A home office full of high-end equipment collecting dust. Finally, she stopped in front of a walk-in closet, slid open the mirrored door, and reached behind a row of coats until her hand found the worn handle of a small black suitcase. She pulled it out and unzipped it, kneeling on the bedroom floor. Inside was everything she never showed: a faded Polaroid of her parents at the beach, a child's drawing from a long-lost student, an unopened envelope addressed in her late brother's handwriting, postmarked 3 years ago. She never had the courage to read it. At the bottom lay a crumpled newspaper clipping, the headline still visible: Whitmore Foundation heiress declines board position, disappears from spotlight. Claire touched the edge of the photo with 2 fingers, tracing the smile on her mother's face. The ache returned, heavy and familiar. Money had bought this house, the education, the security, the distance, but not the quiet in her heart. Tonight, like every night, Claire sat alone in a kitchen built for dinner parties that never happened. She reheated soup she didn't want, poured wine she wouldn't finish, and turned on music she didn't hear. And as the walls of the townhouse wrapped around her like a perfectly tailored cage, she thought again of Sophie and her father. The sharp scent of motor oil clung to Michael's hands no matter how many times he scrubbed them. The garage's fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting a pale glow over grease-stained concrete and rows of worn-out tools. It was almost 9 p.m., and the place had emptied hours ago. But Michael was still elbow-deep under the hood of a rusted sedan, tightening bolts on an engine that hadn't purred in years. "You should have been scrapped," he muttered to the car, his voice dry with exhaustion. "But I know how that feels." The extra shifts were necessary. Rent was due in a week, the electric bill was late, and Sophie's boots, already patched once, were splitting again at the toes. He'd picked up a side job fixing up used cars for resale. The pay wasn't much, but every hour meant a little more food in the fridge, maybe enough to cover Sophie's field trip next month. Maybe. He checked his watch. 9:12 p.m. Damn! He wiped his hands on a rag and locked up the garage, the winter air biting at his cheeks as he jogged to his car. The old Corolla coughed when he turned the key, but thankfully started. The heater made more noise than heat, but he didn't care. His only focus now was getting home. When he stepped through the apartment door, the lights were dim, the apartment still. A pile of dishes waited in the sink, and the kitchen smelled faintly of boxed mac and cheese. In the small bedroom down the hall, Sophie lay curled on her side, a book resting open on her chest. Her nightlight cast a soft glow over the covers she'd kicked halfway off. Michael knelt beside her bed and gently pulled the blanket up, brushing her curls from her forehead. She stirred slightly, eyes fluttering open. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, Bug," he whispered. "Sorry I missed bedtime." It's okay. I read the dragon part twice so you wouldn't miss it. He smiled, something warm blooming in his chest despite the exhaustion. Thanks for saving it for me. As she drifted back to sleep, Michael sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment. The weight of the day pressed down on him, but beside it sat something stronger, this love, this responsibility. It stretched him thin, but it held him together. Tight budgets, tighter bonds. And in the quiet of that small room, Michael remembered what made all of it worth it. The note had been neatly folded in Sophie's backpack, tucked between her reading log and a half-eaten granola bar. Michael unfolded it at the kitchen table that night, still in his coveralls, the ink smudging slightly where Sophie's juice box had leaked. Dear Mr. Bennett, I'd love to schedule a short parent-teacher meeting at your convenience. Nothing urgent, just a chance to connect. Warmly, Claire Whitmore. Michael read the note twice, brow furrowed. Sophie wasn't struggling. She brought home gold stars and smiley faces, always eager to show off her latest drawing or how she'd moved up a reading level. So why did her teacher want to talk? The next afternoon, he left work early, still smelling faintly of diesel and rubber as he walked through the school's front doors. The hallway felt too clean, too quiet, like a world he wasn't supposed to step into. He found room 2B and knocked softly. Come in, Claire's voice called from inside. She stood when he entered, gesturing kindly to the chair across from her desk. She was dressed simply, but everything about her still felt polished, like someone who belonged to a different world entirely. Yet there was no judgment in her eyes, just presence. Mr. Bennett, thank you for coming. He nodded, sitting down awkwardly. Is Sophie okay? Claire smiled gently. She's wonderful, bright, kind, curious. This isn't about her grades. Michael blinked. Oh. I just wanted to check in with you, she said, folding her hands on the desk. Sometimes children like Sophie, responsible, polite, independent, can carry more than we realize. And I see things others might miss. He shifted, unsure how to respond. We get by, he said finally. I know. Her voice was soft, but not pitying. She talks about you all the time, with so much love. Michael looked down, fingers brushing the edge of the desk. I do my best. I can see that. She hesitated, then added, if there's ever anything you or Sophie need, even something small, you're not alone. That struck something in him he didn't expect. Not charity, not intrusion, just a reminder. As he left the classroom, the hallway felt a little less cold. Claire's words stayed with him long after the door shut behind him. You're not alone. The clouds had been threatening all afternoon, brooding over the school like a lid waiting to slam shut. By the time the final bell rang, the sky opened with a vengeance. Fat raindrops hit the pavement like spilled marbles, and the low hum of children's chatter turned into shrieks of surprise and laughter as they scrambled beneath hoods and backpacks. Michael had arrived just in time, jogging up the school steps, hair already damp, jacket clinging to his arms. He spotted Sophie under the awning, her purple umbrella turned inside out by the wind. "Dad!" she called, laughing. Michael took the ruined umbrella and tucked it under his arm. Guess this one's retiring. As they huddled beneath the narrow overhang, waiting for the worst of it to pass, a familiar voice spoke just behind them. Looks like we're all caught. He turned to Sae, Claire standing a few feet away, a navy umbrella in one hand, her other clutching a slim portfolio to her chest. Rain dotted her blouse at the shoulders, but she didn't seem to notice. Her hair had slipped free from its usual bun, a few strands curling against her cheeks. Looks that way, Michael said, trying not to stare. She opened her umbrella and held it out. We can share, at least to the sidewalk. Michael hesitated, then nodded. Sophie, go on ahead, I'll catch up. Sophie scampered ahead, splashing through puddles with her hood up, completely unbothered. Michael stepped beside Claire, and together they ducked under the umbrella, walking slowly toward the edge of the school property. The canopy was just wide enough to force closeness. Their shoulders brushed every few steps. The rain was steady, the air filled with the soft rhythm of water hitting fabric and pavement. "Thanks again for yesterday," he said. "The meeting." Claire glanced at him. "Of course." "You didn't have to check in." "I wanted to," she replied, voice quiet. "You don't hear it enough, but you're doing a really good job." He looked at her then, really looked, past the polished exterior, past the teacher's smile. And for a second, he saw something else. Not pity, not admiration, just a shared ache, a recognition. Claire paused as they reached the end of the sidewalk. "Guess this is where we part ways." Michael nodded, but neither of them moved. The rain kept falling, and under the soft shelter of a borrowed umbrella, something unspoken lingered, something warm, something real. The idea came to Claire late one night, long after the dishwasher had hummed to a stop, and the townhouse had fallen back into its usual echoing silence. She'd been grading spelling tests at the kitchen counter, Sophie's crayon drawing of a family picnic still pinned to the fridge. In the picture, Sophie had drawn herself, her dad, and, without explanation, Claire. All three were smiling beneath a tree. Claire stared at it longer than she meant to. By morning, the plan had taken shape. She introduced it to her class the following Monday with cheerful energy. "We're going to start something new," she told the students as they gathered on the reading rug. "It's called the Kindness Exchange. For the next few weeks, we're going to learn about helping others and put that learning into action." Hands shot up. A chorus of eager voices followed. "Like recycling? Like feeding people? Do we get prizes?" Claire laughed gently. "The reward is helping someone in your community. We're going to collect items for care packages, food, winter clothes, books, toys, and deliver them to families who could use a little extra kindness this season." Sophie's eyes sparkled. She raised her hand slowly. "Can I bring in my old gloves? They're pink and still warm." Claire's heart clenched. "That's a lovely idea, Sophie." She sent letters home that afternoon, carefully worded to sound like any other seasonal initiative. No pressure, just a chance to give. But behind every sentence, Claire was thinking of one family in particular. One dad, too proud to ask for help. One little girl, too brave for her own good. By Friday, boxes filled with canned food, mittens, gently worn coats, and storybooks lined the back wall of the classroom. Claire kept a quiet list, tucking aside items she knew would fit Sophie's small frame or suit Michael's practical tastes. She never said a word to him. She just made sure there'd be a care package set aside before winter break, one that would arrive anonymously, one that might make a tight month feel just a little less tight. The class was proud. They felt important. And Claire? She felt useful for the first time in a long time. Because kindness, when done right, doesn't come with strings. It just comes quietly, and sometimes it changes everything. The gym smelled like cinnamon and construction paper. Strings of twinkling lights draped from basketball hoops, and tables covered in red and green tablecloths lined the walls. Paper snowflakes dangled from the ceiling like hopeful wishes, and the buzz of excited voices echoed off the polished floor. It was the school's annual holiday fundraiser, part winter carnival, part bake sale, part miracle of coordination. Claire stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, ticking names off the volunteer list. She didn't see him right away. "Hey, Ms. Whitmore," Sophie's voice rang out. Claire turned just in time to see her bounding toward the hot cocoa table, a familiar figure behind her, arms loaded with folding chairs. Michael. He was dressed in a simple flannel shirt and jeans, sleeves pushed up to his elbows. A smudge of dust marked his temple, and a bit of sweat clung to the back of his neck despite the cold. He moved with quiet purpose, setting up chairs and tables like he'd done it 100 times. No fanfare, no complaints, just work. Claire watched him out of the corner of her eye as he helped an overwhelmed PTA mom stack supplies. He smiled politely, declined the offer of cookies, then went back to unloading boxes from the back of an old pickup that looked like it had seen better years and maybe wasn't even his. He noticed her eventually, just a small nod, a flicker of recognition. "Didn't know you were volunteering," Claire said as he passed. "Didn't know I needed a resume," he replied, with a small grin. She smiled, caught off guard. "Well, you're making the rest of us look bad." "Don't worry. I charge double for compliments." Claire laughed, really laughed, for the first time that day. He didn't linger after that, just went back to refilling cider jugs and hammering signs into corkboard stands. By the time the event began, Michael had done more than anyone else, and never once asked for a break, a thank you, or a moment in the spotlight. Claire stood by the crafts table later that night, watching Sophie help another child glue sequins onto a pine cone ornament. Michael sat on the floor beside them, crisscrossed, showing them how to hold the glue gun steady. And in that moment, with the lights reflecting in the wide eyes of children and the steady hands of a man who never asked for anything, Claire felt something shift. She didn't believe in fairy tales, but this quiet kind of good, this was something real. It started with a thank you. After the fundraiser, Claire had intended to send Michael a card, something simple, maybe signed by the class. But the words never sat right on the page, too formal, too distant. So she stood in the doorway after school one day, watching as he bent to tie Sophie's shoe with the same gentle care he used fixing engines, and the invitation slipped out before she'd fully thought it through. "Would you both like to come over for dinner?" Michael blinked, straightened slowly. "You mean, like a parent-teacher thing?" Claire smiled. "No, just dinner, no grades, no spelling lists, just food, and maybe some real conversation." He hesitated, then glanced down at Sophie, who was already nodding enthusiastically. "Can we, Dad? Please?" So that Saturday, just after dusk, Michael found himself standing on the steps of a townhouse that didn't quite match what he'd pictured. It wasn't ostentatious, no manicured hedges or flashy cars, just a well-kept porch, warm light behind the windows, and the scent of roasted garlic wafting into the chilly air. Claire opened the door wearing jeans and a soft cream sweater, her hair loose for the first time he'd seen it. "Come in. Shoes off is the only rule." Inside, the place was tasteful but not showy. Bookshelves lined with children's novels and poetry, a record player humming something old and smooth. A candle flickered on the dinner table, but it wasn't for effect. It just seemed like something she did. Sophie was delighted by the mismatched plates and the cloth napkins. "This is fancy," she whispered loudly. Claire laughed. "Only if you've never seen me burn pasta." Dinner was roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and steamed green beans. Simple, comforting. Michael had expected crystal glasses and complicated food with names he couldn't pronounce. Instead, he got warm bread in a basket and second helpings without asking. He didn't talk much at first, but Claire didn't rush him. She asked about Sophie's favorite stories, listened as he described a project he was working on at the garage. No one mentioned bills or grades or the careful balancing act of everyday survival. For one night, Michael didn't feel like he had to explain himself. And as he looked across the table at Sophie's beaming face, and then at Claire, pouring tea with steady hands and eyes that saw far more than she said, he realized something strange. He wasn't uncomfortable. He was home, even if only for a night. The snow had started falling sometime after dinner, soft, drifting flakes that blanketed the world outside in quiet white. Claire's living room glowed in the amber light of the fireplace, its flickering warmth casting long, gentle shadows on the walls. Sophie had fallen asleep curled under a throw blanket on the couch, one hand clutching the edge of a pillow, the other still wrapped around the spine of a picture book. Michael sat nearby in a worn armchair, a mug of tea warming his hands. His jacket hung from the stair railing, his boots by the door. He hadn't planned to stay this long, but the snow kept falling, and for once, there was no rush to leave. Claire came in with 2 fresh mugs and offered him a quiet smile as she took a seat on the other end of the couch, careful not to disturb Sophie. "She's out cold," she whispered, glancing at the sleeping girl. "Didn't even make it to the 2nd story." Michael nodded, smiling. "She always crashes hard after a good day." They sipped their tea in companionable silence for a while. Then Claire leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees, gaze fixed on the fire. "You ever wonder if life was supposed to turn out differently?" she asked, not looking at him. Michael glanced at her, caught off guard by the softness in her voice. "Yeah," he said. "A lot, actually." Claire shifted, her voice almost too quiet. "I was engaged once. A long time ago. He was a good man, but he wanted a version of me that came with board meetings and cocktail dresses, and I wanted something that didn't feel like a performance." Michael watched her for a beat, then looked down into his mug. "My wife passed when Sophie was 4. Car accident, hit black ice on the way home from the grocery store." Claire looked up, her face open and unguarded. "I'm so sorry." "Yeah," he said, voice thickening. "Me too." The fire crackled between them, and for a moment it felt like the whole world had fallen away, just two people sitting with their losses side by side. Claire reached out, fingers brushing the back of his hand. "You're doing more than okay, Michael." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in a long while didn't feel like he had to carry the whole weight of his life alone. Outside, snowflakes kept falling. Inside, something softer had begun to settle too. The morning started like any other. Michael was at the garage before sunrise, hands already deep in the guts of a stubborn alternator, coffee gone cold on the workbench beside him. The heater sputtered weakly overhead, and the radio played a mix of static and local sports talk. It was shaping up to be another long day. During his 10-minute break, he pulled out his phone and sat on an overturned milk crate in the corner of the shop. Sophie had forgotten to take her library book to school, so he'd promised to drop it off after his shift. He figured he'd look up the school schedule online, make sure it was okay to swing by during lunch hour. He typed in the name of the school. But the auto-suggest in the search bar caught his eye. Claire Whitmore featured in EdTech Today. Michael frowned, clicked. The article loaded with a polished photo of Claire, not the soft, quiet woman he'd had tea with by the fire, but one dressed in a sharp black blazer, her arms folded, standing in front of a projection screen with the words Whitmore Education Foundation behind her. His eyes scanned the headline, "Whitmore Heiress steps down from board, leaves company leadership citing personal direction change." Heiress. The word felt absurd, heavy, foreign. He kept reading, heart thudding harder with each line. Claire wasn't just a teacher. She was the daughter of Martin Whitmore, CEO and founder of the Whitmore Group, a billion-dollar educational tech company used in schools across the country. The article mentioned early investments in learning platforms, private schools funded in her name, and a quiet but significant departure from public life 2 years ago. Michael sat back, stunned. All this time, he'd thought she was just a kind, slightly mysterious woman who packed good sandwiches and had a soft spot for second graders. He never imagined her world stretched so far beyond snowflake crafts and quiet classroom mornings. He thought about her fireplace, her calm presence, her eyes when she looked at Sophie. And suddenly, something tightened in his chest. She knew. All along, she knew his situation, his struggles, his pride, and she hadn't said a word. Not a teacher, he thought bitterly. Not just a teacher. She was something else entirely. And now, everything felt like it had shifted, subtly, quietly, but completely. Michael didn't bring the library book to school that day. He told himself it was because he got too busy, the schedule too tight, but the truth sat heavier than that. After reading the article, something had cracked open inside him. A space he didn't know was there, filled with questions he didn't want to ask and answers he wasn't sure he wanted. That night, Claire texted him, "Hope your day wasn't too crazy. I'm making soup again. Sophie left her mittens here. Want me to drop them by?" Michael stared at the message for a long time, thumb hovering above the screen. He typed, "No need, we're good," then deleted it. Then typed, "Thanks, but we've got extras." He hit send. The reply came fast. "All right. Tell Sophie I said hi." He didn't. The next day, Sophie came home from school full of stories about Ms. Whitmore, how she let them build marshmallow towers, how she helped her pick out a book about girl astronauts, how she told a story about her own second-grade teacher who wore sparkly shoes and made up words. "She's the best, Dad," Sophie said between bites of reheated pizza. "I wish she could come to my birthday." Michael nodded, distracted. "Yeah, we'll see." But Sophie noticed. She always noticed. "You haven't talked about her lately," she said, glancing up. "Did something happen?" He froze for a second too long, then forced a smile. "No, Bug, just tired." And he was tired, but it wasn't just work. It was the knowing. The knowing that Claire wasn't who he thought she was, that she had built a life from money he couldn't even imagine, that while he scraped by to buy new boots, she probably had a spare pair ordered with the tap of her phone. He didn't know what to do with that. So he did what he'd always done when things felt uncertain. He stepped back. He stopped replying right away, didn't linger when he saw her at school, kept his words clipped and polite. And each time Sophie asked if they could visit Miss Whitmore again, Michael gave her the same answer. Maybe later. But later kept stretching farther away. The cold snapped hard that week. Pipes groaned in their apartment walls. The radiator wheezed like it was giving up. And Michael came home each night with his knuckles cracked and bleeding from the cold, his face drawn tighter than usual. Hours had been cut at the garage, and the side work dried up almost overnight. He didn't say much about it to Sophie, just smiled thinner, packed smaller lunches, and made the powdered soup stretch a little longer. Sophie didn't complain, but Claire noticed. She noticed the way Sophie's coat looked tighter in the shoulders, the way she rubbed her hands together during morning circle, how she stopped taking off her backpack even during class like it was some kind of barrier between her and the world. And she noticed something else, too. Michael's absence. Not from school pickups, he was always there, but from her. He didn't respond to her texts anymore. He didn't make eye contact in the hallway. She understood, maybe even deserved it, but she wasn't ready to walk away from Sophie. So she found another way. It started small. A new pair of pink knit gloves left in Sophie's cubby with a note written in blocky teacher print. Looks like someone's hands needed a little more warmth. A friend. Then came a book wrapped in brown paper, Sophie and the Snow Tiger, with no sender, just a post-it that said, "Saw this and thought of you." And finally, on Thursday, when the temperature plummeted and the morning frost was thick enough to crust the windows, Sophie found a bag in her locker, a gently used puffer coat in her favorite shade of blue, a thermos with cartoon stars, and a pair of thick wool socks. She ran to Claire, holding the bag like treasure. "Someone keeps giving me things," she said, eyes wide with awe. "Do you think it's Santa?" Claire crouched beside her, tucking a curl behind Sophie's ear. "Maybe? Or maybe someone just thinks you deserve a little extra magic." Sophie beamed, and Claire said nothing more. Michael didn't ask where the new gloves came from, or the book, or the coat. He just looked at them once quietly, then pulled Sophie into his arms that night and held her longer than usual. Claire didn't need thanks, didn't expect it. Sometimes kindness is loud, but sometimes it's best left wrapped in silence. The car sputtered 3 blocks from the garage. Michael hit the steering wheel with the heel of his hand, hard enough to make Sophie flinch in the back seat. She didn't say anything, just tightened the straps on her backpack and looked out the window, pretending she didn't hear the muffled curse that slipped from his mouth. The exhaust had been rattling for weeks. He knew it was only a matter of time, but time wasn't something he had the luxury to spare. He coaxed the Corolla forward, praying it would hold just a little longer. The engine groaned, then choked out completely as they reached the corner of Maple and First. Dead, right there in the middle of the road. Michael popped the hood and climbed out, the cold biting through his jacket as passing cars swerved around them. Smoke hissed up from the engine block like it was mocking him. Sophie stood on the sidewalk, arms folded against the cold, watching him with quiet worry. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked softly. "Yeah," Michael lied, wrenching at the hood. "We're fine, just a hiccup." But they weren't fine. He was already 20 minutes late to work. By the time he got the car towed, on credit he didn't have, and dropped Sophie at school with a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, it was nearly 10 a.m. He ran the 3 blocks to the garage, heart pounding harder with every step, and burst through the side door like a man trying to outrun the truth. But Charlie, his manager, just stood there, arms folded across his chest. "You're late. Again." Michael's breath came in heavy clouds. "Car broke down. I'm sorry." "I can't do this anymore," Charlie said. "We're behind. I need guys I can count on." Michael didn't argue. What was there to say? He nodded once, slow, then grabbed his toolbox. Every eye in the shop followed him out. No one said a word. That night, he sat at the kitchen table while Sophie colored quietly on the floor. He stared at the bills, the overdue notices, the grocery list he hadn't filled. His pride throbbed in his chest like a second heartbeat. He thought of Claire, of the softness in her voice, of the warmth she offered like it cost her nothing. And still, he said nothing, because if Michael Bennett had anything left, it was the resolve not to ask, even if it broke him. The snow had come fast that morning, thick, wet flakes that buried sidewalks and bent tree branches under their weight. By noon, the school had called for early dismissal, and by 2, the lot outside was empty except for a few staff cars and a pair of tire tracks that led to nowhere. Claire zipped her coat up to her chin and peered through the front windows of the school, watching as the last of the buses pulled away. She was about to lock up when she heard the sound of small footsteps behind her. Sophie stood there, wrapped in her too light jacket, backpack sagging low on her shoulders, her cheeks red from the cold. "Where's your dad, sweetheart?" Claire asked gently, kneeling to meet her eyes. Sophie looked down at her boots. "He was supposed to pick me up." Claire glanced at the clock on the wall, nearly 30 minutes late. "He probably just got stuck," Sophie added quickly, like she had to defend him. "He's been really busy today." Claire gave a small, measured nod. "Okay, why don't you wait with me, just until he gets here?" She made hot chocolate in a chipped mug from the staff lounge, stirred in extra marshmallows, and brought out an old board game from the cabinet. Sophie played half-heartedly, her eyes flicking to the windows every few minutes. An hour passed. Claire checked her phone. No missed calls, no messages. "Do you want me to try calling him?" she asked softly. Sophie nodded. Michael's phone went straight to voicemail, twice. By the time the sun began its descent and the snow turned from soft to sharp, Claire made the call. "You're staying with me tonight," she said gently. "Just until your dad can get to you, okay?" Sophie hesitated for a breath, then nodded. Claire's townhouse was warm, smelled like cinnamon and lemon oil. She gave Sophie a pair of flannel pajamas, tucked her into the guest bed with a nightlight shaped like a star, and read her a story about a fox who found a home when he least expected it. Later that evening, just after 9, her phone finally rang. Michael's voice came through the line, low and tired and laced with panic. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. I got caught up and my phone died and—" "She's safe," Claire said quietly. "She's warm, and you can come get her in the morning." There was silence on the other end, then quietly, "Thank you." Claire hung up and sat on the stairs outside Sophie's room, listening to the little girl's even breaths. Snow still fell outside, but inside the house finally felt full. By the time Michael arrived the next morning, the sun had melted the worst of the snow into slush and puddles, turning the sidewalks into rivers of gray. He looked like he hadn't slept, eyes heavy, clothes wrinkled, worry clinging to him like frost. But when Claire opened the door, all of that slipped away the moment he saw Sophie, hair tousled from sleep, dressed in borrowed pajamas 2 sizes too big, grinning as she launched into his arms. "I had pancakes," she said against his chest, "with whipped cream and chocolate chips." Michael looked up, still holding her tight. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." Claire smiled. "It wasn't trouble." He started to make his goodbyes, but Sophie tugged his sleeve. "Can we stay a little longer, just for breakfast?" Claire stepped aside without a word, and somehow, just like that, it became lunch. Then lunch stretched into dinner, as if no one wanted to name what was happening, as if saying "this feels nice" out loud might make it disappear. The table was set for 3. Chicken stew simmered on the stove, warm bread cooling on the counter. Michael tried to help, but Claire waved him off, telling him to just sit, rest, let someone else take care of things for once. So he did, tentatively at first, then fully, leaning into the comfort like someone remembering what it felt like to exhale. Sophie chattered the entire meal, about school, her favorite library books, the snow fort Claire had helped her build in the yard that afternoon. Michael mostly listened, laughing quietly, when Claire gently teased him about his picky taste in vegetables. The sound surprised even him. Afterward, Sophie dozed off on the couch beneath a thick quilt, her face slack with the kind of sleep that only comes from feeling completely safe. Michael stayed a little longer, sitting at Claire's kitchen table as the light dimmed and the kettle whistled. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was easy, lived in. "This feels—" he started, then stopped, unsure. Claire met his eyes. "Like it's not supposed to end after one night?" He nodded. She didn't reach for his hand. She didn't press. But she didn't need to, because something had shifted in him, something real. And for the first time in years, Michael didn't feel like he was surviving. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was beginning again. The next morning the snow had stopped, but something colder lingered between them. Michael stood in Claire's kitchen, mug in hand, steam curling past his face. The stew pot from last night still sat on the stove, and Sophie's giggles echoed faintly from the living room where she was building a puzzle on the rug. Everything looked warm, ordinary, safe. But inside, Michael felt like he was standing in a wind tunnel. He set the mug down too hard. "I found the article." Claire turned slowly from the sink, drying her hands on a dish towel. "What article?" "Claire Whitmore, daughter of Martin Whitmore, Education Empire, Foundation heir. The woman who stepped down from a billion-dollar company to become a second-grade teacher in a public school. That article." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she nodded once. "I figured you would." Michael folded his arms, eyes sharp. "So it's all true?" "Yes." "Then why lie? Why not tell me who you really were?" Claire's voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed something more fragile. "I didn't lie, I just didn't lead with a headline." He exhaled hard. "Do you know what it feels like to sit at a table with someone who has everything while you're trying to decide if you can afford lunch for your kid tomorrow? And all the while you're smiling, pretending you're not drowning?" Claire stepped closer, her voice low. "And do you know what it feels like to grow up in houses filled with money but not love? To have every door open and not know who's walking through it for the right reasons?" Michael looked away. "I left all of it," she continued. "The meetings, the press, the boardrooms. I was always someone's daughter, someone's investment, someone's disappointment. I wanted to be someone else, to matter for something simple, so I became a teacher." She reached for the back of a chair, gripping it like a lifeline. "And then I met Sophie, and you. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't matter who I used to be." Michael's jaw tightened. His pride wrestled with something deeper, something afraid. "Why help us?" "Because you didn't ask," she said softly. "Because you never would. And because you're the kind of man who deserves more than survival." Silence stretched long between them, filled with the hum of the fridge and Sophie's soft humming in the next room. "I just needed to know what this was," Michael said finally. "What you are." Claire nodded. "I'm still figuring that out, too." And for the first time, he believed her. The morning of Christmas Eve, Michael stood at the door of Claire's townhouse, with Sophie bundled beside him, cheeks pink, arms wrapped tightly around a small gift she'd made with glue, glitter, and too much heart. The snowfall had softened everything, rooftops, sidewalks, even the tension in his chest. But still he hesitated. You sure about this, Bug? He asked. Sophie looked up at him, wide-eyed. She's all alone, Dad. Nobody should be alone on Christmas. That's what undid him, not the snow, not the tree he'd seen through her window last night, glowing soft and golden, not even the quiet ache in his chest that had only grown since the night of the stew and puzzle pieces. It was Sophie, always Sophie, who cracked him open. Claire opened the door before he could knock. "Merry Christmas," she said, smiling like she meant it. She wore a sweater with tiny embroidered stars, sleeves pushed up, flour dusted across one hip. The smell of cinnamon and nutmeg drifted out like an invitation. "Merry Christmas," Sophie beamed, already stepping inside. Michael followed more slowly, hands still jammed into his coat pockets. "You sure we're not imposing?" "I think you know by now," Claire said gently. "You're not." The house felt different today, not just warm, but alive. Music played low in the background, jazz, soft and rich. The tree in the corner twinkled with delicate lights, and the dining table was set for 3, with mismatched napkins and handmade place cards Claire claimed Sophie had inspired. They baked cookies, burned one batch and laughed about it. They played card games and drank cocoa and opened small, thoughtful gifts under the tree. Claire had given Sophie a boxed set of storybooks. Michael unwrapped a new wrench set, engraved with his initials. He looked up at her, startled. "I noticed the old ones were rusting," she said simply. He didn't have words for the way it hit him. That night, after Sophie fell asleep beneath a fleece blanket on the couch, her face still lit by Christmas lights, Michael found himself sitting beside Claire, shoulder to shoulder, not speaking. He didn't say thank you. She didn't ask him to. And as he watched the snow fall gently outside, his hand brushed hers, just briefly. But he didn't pull away. He didn't need to hold on to his pride tonight. For the first time in years, he didn't need to hold on at all. The new year brought more than fresh snow and second-grade science projects. It brought whispers. It started subtly, like it always does. Snippets overheard at school pickup, the way a couple of parents looked at Claire a little too long during drop-off. How one mother, lips pursed, said, "Oh, I heard she used to be some kind of big deal. Money, family name, all that." And another nodded with a tight smile, adding, "Makes you wonder what she's doing here, doesn't it?" Claire pretended not to notice. She focused on the kids, on lesson plans and hallway bulletin boards. But Michael saw it. The way her smile held a fraction longer when she passed a group of parents, how she skipped staff lunch that Tuesday, how she walked just a little faster to her car at the end of the day. Sophie didn't understand why Ms. Whitmore looked tired, just that she did. And that was enough for Michael. He didn't plan to speak. He never liked drawing attention, but on Friday afternoon, when he walked into the school to pick up Sophie and caught the tail end of a conversation outside the front office, 2 parents speculating casually cruel, he couldn't hold his tongue. "She probably bought her way into the job," one woman muttered. Who knows what kind of strings she pulled. Michael stopped beside them, calm, solid, his voice low but steady. "She didn't pull anything," he said. "She showed up, every day, even when people didn't see her, even when she didn't have to." The women looked startled, embarrassed, but he didn't give them time to recover. "She teaches because she wants to. She's the reason Sophie smiles when she talks about school, and if any of you spent 5 minutes paying attention, you'd know she belongs here more than most." The words weren't elegant, just honest. Claire heard about it that evening, not from the parents, but from Sophie, who described her dad's voice as brave, like in the stories. Later, Michael texted her, "Ignore them. You're doing more good here than they'll ever understand." Claire stared at the message for a long time. Then, for the first time in days, she exhaled without holding something back. Because some things, like truth and character and kindness, didn't need defending. But sometimes it meant everything to have someone who would. It started with a name on a napkin, Claire handed it to Michael one evening after school as he buckled Sophie into the back seat and tossed her backpack into the front. The sun was low, golden across the snow, and the day had been long in the quiet, familiar kind of way. "Just a place I heard about," Claire said casually. "They're looking for mechanics with design skills. Thought of you." Michael unfolded the napkin. On it was scrawled the name of a small auto design firm he'd only heard about in passing, Copperline Motors. Local, sustainable, privately funded, known for treating its workers like people instead of numbers. Not the kind of place that took walk-ins. He raised an eyebrow. "You moonlight as a recruiter now?" Claire shrugged with a smile. "I moonlight as someone who listens when people talk about what they're passionate about." Michael tucked the napkin into his pocket, not really expecting much, but he called. He showed up for the interview a week later, dressed in the cleanest shirt he owned, hands still rough from freelance jobs and late-night repairs. He brought his sketches, the ones he usually kept in a drawer, half-finished blueprints and notebook pages stained with coffee. The owner, a wiry man with calloused hands and eyes that lit up when Michael spoke about ethical engines and sustainable builds, offered him a position on the spot. Michael blinked, stunned. "Wait, you're serious?" "Been looking for someone like you for 6 months," the man said, shaking his hand. "Don't know how I missed you." Michael started the following Monday. He came home that night and told Sophie first. She'd danced in her socks across the floor. Then he texted Claire. "Got the job. Not sure how, but I got it." She stared at the message for a moment before replying, "You deserve it. That's how." She never told him that the owner of Copperline had once sat on the advisory board of her family's education foundation. Never mentioned that she'd emailed his portfolio anonymously the week before, just in case. Because sometimes love isn't in the grand gestures. Sometimes it's a name on a napkin, a quiet push behind the scenes, and the belief that someone's worth more than what the world's given them. And Claire believed in Michael, even if he never knew how much. The night was quiet, the kind that hummed with a kind of stillness you don't notice until you're inside it. Michael sat on Claire's couch, the glow from the fireplace brushing against his face, a mug of tea cooling between his palms. Across from him, Claire folded and unfolded the edge of a blanket, her eyes darting toward him, then away. She'd invited him over to celebrate his first week at Copperline. Sophie was asleep in the guest room, curled up with her new chapter book, the one Claire had tucked into her backpack with a ribbon and a handwritten note. "For the bravest girl I know." Michael leaned back, exhaling like he hadn't breathed all day. "It's weird," he said, "waking up and actually looking forward to work. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop." Claire smiled softly. "Maybe it's not a trap. Maybe it's just a beginning." He looked at her then, and the silence between them turned from comfortable to something else, something full of weight and possibility. She hesitated, fingers tightening on the blanket. "Michael, there's something I need to tell you, about the job, about me." He stiffened slightly, not from suspicion, but from something deeper. Hope, maybe, fear. But before she could finish the thought, tiny footsteps padded down the hall. Sophie appeared in the doorway, pajama-clad and sleepy-eyed, holding a piece of paper with 2 hands like it was sacred. "I forgot to give you this," she mumbled. Michael reached out, unfolding the crinkled drawing. Crayons filled the page, 3 stick figures under a tree, holding hands. One tall, one small, one with long brown hair and a bright yellow sun drawn over her head. At the top, in crooked letters, "Me, Dad, and Miss Claire." At the bottom, "My family." Claire went still. Michael looked at the picture for a long moment, the lump rising in his throat, unexpected and hard. "Thanks, Bug," he said softly, pulling her into his lap. Sophie yawned and melted into him, already drifting off again. Claire watched them, heart full and aching. The words she had meant to say slipped away like steam from the tea she never drank. Because some truths could wait. But this moment was already perfect. It happened by accident. Michael had swung by the school after hours to drop off a set of toy tools Sophie had forgotten in her cubby. She was insistent they had to be there for tomorrow's show and tell. The halls were quiet, washed in the soft hum of custodial lights. His boots echoed faintly on the linoleum, his breath clouding faintly in the cooler air by the windows. He didn't mean to stop near the staff lounge, didn't mean to hear her voice. "I just didn't want him to feel like a charity case," Claire was saying. Her voice wasn't panicked or ashamed. It was calm, but edged with something tender. "He's proud, I get that, but he's also tired. And if I can help without stepping in front of him, why wouldn't I?" Michael froze. Another voice, someone he didn't recognize, responded with something muffled. Claire replied, clear and certain, "I only gave the firm a nudge. They already loved his work. I just made sure it was seen." There was a beat of silence, then, "He deserves a chance. That's all I ever wanted to give him." Michael backed away from the door quietly, pulse drumming loud in his ears. He left the toy tools on the front office counter, walked out into the parking lot, and sat in his car with the engine off, staring at his hands. So it was her, the job, the timing, the napkin with the firm's name, the engraved wrench set. He should have known. He should have seen it. The storm that built inside him wasn't anger. It wasn't even betrayal. It was something much more complicated, pride wounded by kindness, gratitude wrapped in embarrassment. A man who had always carried his world alone, now realizing someone had quietly been holding up the edges. Part of him wanted to march back inside and demand she never do anything like that again. But another part, the one who remembered his daughter's face when he came home smiling from work, the one who now had evenings free to read to her instead of hustling side jobs, whispered something else. She didn't do it for control. She did it for love. And that truth hurt more than it should, because Michael Bennett wasn't used to being seen, and Claire Whitmore had seen all of him, even the broken parts, and helped anyway. Without asking, without praise, without needing to be known. He didn't know what to do with that, but he knew one thing for certain. The next time they spoke, things would be different. The knock on Claire's door came just after sunset. She wasn't expecting company. Sophie had already gone home, and the house was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of kitchen lights and the fading pink of dusk spilling through the windows. When she opened the door and saw Michael standing there, she knew. His face wasn't hard, but it wasn't soft either. His jaw was tight, his eyes shadowed with something heavy. She stepped aside without a word, and he walked in, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders stiff. "Coffee?" she asked gently, already knowing the answer. "No." He stood near the table, then turned to face her, the silence between them like static. "I heard you," he said. Claire didn't pretend not to understand. "In the lounge," he added. "You were talking about the job, about me." She folded her arms, nodding slowly. "I figured you might. Eventually." He stared at her, hurt blooming behind his eyes like a bruise. "You went behind my back. Do you know what that feels like? To finally think you earned something, and then find out maybe someone just handed it to you?" "I didn't hand you anything, Michael. You made a call. I gave them your work. That's it. I didn't ask them to hire you. I didn't promise them anything." His voice dropped, more pain than anger now. "You didn't think I could do it on my own." Her breath caught. "No, I knew you could. That's why I did it." He looked away, jaw flexing. Claire took a step forward. "You think I did it out of pity? You think I looked at you and saw a project?" Her voice shook now, not with fear, but with feeling. "Michael, I've had people throw money at me my whole life. I've seen what that does. I didn't want to rescue you. I wanted to believe in you, quietly, without making you smaller." He blinked, but didn't move. "I've seen the way you take care of Sophie," she went on, softer now. "The way you show up, no matter how tired, no matter how little you've got left. That's not something I could walk away from. I didn't do it to fix you. I did it because I care, because maybe I hoped you'd let me be part of your world." Michael didn't answer right away. The storm in him hadn't cleared, but it had shifted, slowed. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw not a savior, not a benefactor, not a billionaire hiding behind a soft voice and warm casseroles. He saw Claire, and that made everything harder, and somehow everything clearer. The days that followed felt longer than they should have. Michael still woke early, packed Sophie's lunch, walked her to school. He still showed up to work at Copperline, where his hands were busy but his mind wasn't. He still smiled when Sophie told him stories at dinner, nodded when she asked questions, helped her with spelling lists and math homework. But inside, something hollowed out. He hadn't seen Claire since that night. No texts, no notes, no invitations. And he hadn't sent any either. The air between them had cooled, not with anger, but with absence. A quiet kind of ache that settled in the bones, and Michael carried it with him the same way he used to carry the weight of unpaid bills and late rent notices. Only now, it wasn't about survival. It was about loss. Sophie noticed first. She asked about Claire at bedtime, her voice small under the quilt. "When can we go back to her house?" Michael sat on the edge of her bed, brushing a curl from her cheek. "I don't know, Bug." "Did she stop liking us?" "No," he said too quickly. Then slower, "Sometimes grown-ups just need space." Sophie nodded, but she didn't understand. Not really. How could she? She drew fewer pictures. Her smiles were shorter. And one morning she quietly folded a crayon drawing into her backpack without showing it to Michael. He found it later, forgotten. 3 stick figures under a cloud instead of a sun. No names, no smiles. At work, Michael built engines and tightened bolts, but his mind drifted toward Claire's laughter, the way she said Sophie's name like it meant something personal, the nights by the fire, the dinners that felt like family. He kept telling himself he did the right thing, kept his pride, stood his ground. But pride didn't make the apartment warmer. It didn't read bedtime stories or draw stars in the margins of Sophie's spelling tests. And every day that passed without her made one thing painfully clear. In pushing her away, he hadn't just protected his independence. He'd given up something irreplaceable. He just wasn't sure how to get it back. The email came on a Wednesday, tucked between a coupon for tires and a bill reminder he'd been avoiding. Subject, Copperline internal posting, design, lead interview, invitation. Michael blinked at it. He read the message twice, then a third time, just to be sure it wasn't a mistake. A promotion. A real one. One he hadn't asked for, hadn't expected, just noticed on the bulletin board last week and applied to on a quiet impulse. He didn't tell Sophie, didn't tell Claire, of course not. The interview was set for Friday morning, and when the day came, he wore his cleanest button-down, the sleeves still slightly frayed at the cuffs. His hands felt too big for the room, calloused and rough, next to the smooth polished table in the conference office. Across from him sat Lydia Cho, the firm's creative director, sharp-eyed, efficient, the kind of woman who seemed born in blazers. "Michael Bennett," she said, tapping her pen. "Your portfolio was solid. Your concept for the modular drivetrain system was unexpected." "Unexpected good, or unexpected you thought I stole it?" he asked, half a smile tugging at his mouth. She didn't smile, but her eyes flicked up with interest. "Unexpected. Smart. You took something basic and found a better way to do it. That's rare." Michael nodded, trying to ignore the hammering in his chest. "That's kind of what I do. I see what's broken and figure out how to fix it." He spoke clearly, not nervously, about design, about the garage work that taught him how to problem solve with his hands, about systems that needed fewer parts, not more, about people, like his customers back then, who needed cars that didn't punish them for not being rich. He didn't talk about Claire, or the path that led him here. He didn't need to. When the interview ended, Lydia extended her hand. "We'll be in touch soon, but between you and me, I think you're exactly what this place needs." He walked out into the cold, chin lifted, breath puffing in clouds. He had done this, not because someone made a call, not because he got lucky, because he earned it. And for the first time in weeks, he felt like he was standing on solid ground, his own. Claire stood in the doorway of her classroom, staring at the rows of desks, now emptied for winter break. The paper snowflakes the children had taped to the windows fluttered slightly in the draft from the old heater. She hadn't taken them down yet. Couldn't quite bring herself to. Her coat was draped over her arm, her purse heavier than usual. Inside it sat a sealed envelope addressed to the district office, her letter of resignation. No one knew, not yet. She walked slowly to the desk and sat down, tracing her fingers across the edge of Sophie's last drawing, left on the corner in a lopsided pile of end-of-semester projects. It was a redrawing of the one from weeks ago, 3 stick figures again, under a bright yellow sun. But this time, there was something added, a house, and inside it, 3 hearts. Claire swallowed hard and folded the picture carefully, slipping it into her purse. She'd thought she could start over here, that she could leave behind the name, the money, the expectations, that she could become someone honest, someone real, in a world that didn't care about her last name or the size of her inheritance. But maybe that had been naive. Michael hadn't said another word since their confrontation. Sophie smiled less. The hallway glances from parents had started again, colder than before, and the walls of the life she'd tried to build here, brick by careful brick, suddenly felt thinner. Fragile. She'd looked at other towns, smaller ones, places where no one would recognize the Whitmore name, places where she could teach, quietly, anonymously, without the hope that maybe, just maybe, this life could be shared with someone. Because building a life was one thing, but building it with someone, that required trust. And she wasn't sure Michael would ever forgive her for believing in him without asking first. A gust of wind rattled the windows, and Claire stood, slowly slipping the resignation letter back into her purse. She didn't put it in the mailbox, not yet. But the decision hung there, waiting, because maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe love wasn't enough when the person you gave it to wasn't ready to receive it. And maybe letting go was the only real way to prove she'd meant it. It was tucked beneath Sophie's pillow, folded into quarters, the paper soft from being opened and closed too many times. Michael hadn't meant to find it. He was just changing her sheets on a lazy Saturday morning while she played in the living room, still in pajamas, humming off-key to a cartoon theme song. At first he thought it was a drawing. Then he saw the handwriting, crooked, careful, in Sophie's favorite purple gel pen. "Dear Ms. Claire, I miss you. I don't know if I did something wrong, but I hope I didn't. My dad is sad. He doesn't say it, but I know. He doesn't laugh as much. He doesn't look at you when you're near the school. I still think about Christmas. That was my favorite day ever. I liked the soup and the stars, and when you read the Fox story twice, even though you said one time was enough. You are part of our family, even if it's just in my heart. Love, Sophie." Michael sat on the edge of her bed, the letter trembling slightly in his hands. Each word landed like a stone. He hadn't seen it, not really. He'd been so busy protecting his pride, guarding his independence, that he hadn't noticed how his silence had become a wound. Not just for Claire, but for Sophie, for all of them. He thought about the way Claire had pulled back, the sadness that had crept into her voice the last time they spoke, the unspoken goodbye he'd felt in the air, and now this letter. Simple, pure, a child's truth with no agenda, no fear, just love. He folded it carefully, smoothed the crease, and placed it in his coat pocket. Then he walked into the living room and knelt beside Sophie, pulling her gently into his arms. "Do you think," he said quietly, "Claire would like it if we visited her today?" Sophie's face lit up, hopeful and bright. "Really?" Michael nodded, heart heavy and full at once. "Yeah, I think it's time we told her what we should have said a long time ago." because sometimes it takes a little girl's heart to remind a grown man how to use his own. The snow was falling again, soft and quiet, the kind that didn't sting but blanketed the world in hush. Michael stood just outside the school doors, hands in his coat pockets, watching his breath curl into the air. Beside him, Sophie bounced on her toes, clutching a folded piece of paper in her mittened hands. "She's probably still packing up," she said, her voice hushed, like they were waiting for someone famous. Michael smiled, nervous but steady. "Yeah, teachers take a while to leave." He had rehearsed the words a dozen times, in the car, in the mirror, but none of it felt quite right. So now he just stood there, letting the silence settle, letting the snow do what it does best, soften the sharp edges. When the school doors finally opened, Claire stepped out, arms full of books, scarf wrapped tight. She paused when she saw them. Her eyes flicked from Sophie's wide grin to Michael's quiet, unreadable gaze. "Hi," she said gently. "Hi," Sophie chirped. She thrust the folded paper forward. "I wrote you something." Claire took it carefully, glancing at Michael as she opened it. The letter was short, in Sophie's familiar, lopsided script. "You are still in our family. Please come home. Love, Sophie." Claire's eyes glistened, but she said nothing. Not yet. Michael took a step forward. His voice was quiet, rough at the edges. "I saw the letter, the one she wrote before this." Claire nodded slowly, bracing herself. "I should have said this weeks ago," he continued. "But thank you for everything, for believing in me when I didn't, for helping without asking for credit, for caring about Sophie like she's your own." Claire opened her mouth, but he held up a hand not to stop her, just to finish. "I let pride get in the way, and I let fear talk louder than truth, but not today." He extended his hand, palm open. "We're heading home. Would you walk with us this time?" Claire stared at his hand for just a second before sliding hers into it. It was warm, solid. Sophie slipped between them, grabbing both their hands without asking. And together the three of them walked down the snowy sidewalk, not as strangers, not as teacher and parent, not as two people from different worlds, but as something closer, something real, something that felt finally like the start of home. By the time winter gave way to the soft blush of spring, the rhythms of their lives had quietly changed. There was no official conversation, no formal agreement, just a gradual weaving together of days, like threads crossing in and out of each other until one couldn't quite tell where one life ended and the other began. Sunday dinners became their ritual. What started as an invitation here or there soon turned into an expectation, then a tradition. Michael would bring over groceries, always too few, always apologizing, and Claire would roll her eyes and make magic with what they had. Sophie helped set the table, always insisting they use the mismatched cloth napkins Claire kept in a drawer just for real dinners. Afterward, they'd read. Sometimes Michael read aloud while the two of them curled on the couch with blankets and tea. Other nights, Claire picked a favorite from her childhood and did all the voices, making Sophie giggle so hard she'd snort and cover her face in embarrassment. It became normal, that kind of laughter, easy, familiar. During the week, Claire stopped by the garage once in a while, usually with lunch in a brown bag and something for Sophie tucked inside. Michael started showing her the designs he was working on, just casually at first, but then with the quiet pride of a man not used to sharing his dreams. They went for walks after school, sometimes to the park, sometimes just around the block, Sophie skipping ahead while Claire and Michael talked about everything and nothing, how the light was changing, how Sophie was reading above her grade level now, how spring always smelled like second chances. They didn't name what was happening between them. There were no declarations, no dramatic moments, just the slow, steady formation of a life, a new kind of life. Michael, who once kept his world locked tight, had started leaving room at the table. And Claire, who had built walls out of good intentions and loneliness, was learning what it meant to be truly known. Together, They were finding a rhythm, not perfect, but real. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like they weren't just hoping for happiness. They were building it. The proposal didn't happen on a mountaintop or beneath fireworks or in some candlelit restaurant with a violin playing in the background. It happened on a Tuesday. They were in Claire's kitchen, rain tapping gently at the windows, the smell of roasting vegetables drifting through the air. Sophie sat at the table, drawing quietly, her tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth in concentration. Michael stood by the sink, dish towel in hand, watching Claire as she laughed softly at something Sophie had said. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, and her hair was falling loose from the clip she always forgot to tighten. She looked like home, and that was it. He set the towel down and crossed the room, nerves quietly thrumming beneath his skin. Claire turned toward him, mid-sentence, catching the shift in his expression. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, voice low. "Better than okay." Sophie looked up, sensing something, but stayed quiet, the kind of quiet that children give when they know a moment matters. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Not velvet, not from a jeweler, just something he'd carved himself from a block of wood he'd found in the garage. Inside was a silver washer from his first engine rebuild, polished until it shone. Tied to a leather cord. Claire blinked. Her hand lifted to her heart without realizing it. "I don't have a ring," Michael said, "but I have this. The first thing I ever fixed that didn't fall apart, kind of like us." He cleared his throat, searching her face. "I'm not promising castles or diamonds, but I'm promising breakfasts with too much syrup, bedtime stories, Sunday dinners, showing up, always showing up." Claire's eyes brimmed, but she didn't speak. "I want us to keep building this. Whatever this is, not because it's perfect, but because it's ours. Not a fairy tale, Claire, but real." He paused. "Will you marry me?" Sophie let out a tiny gasp, then immediately covered her mouth. Claire laughed through the tears, nodding even before the words left her lips. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely." Michael slipped the makeshift ring around her wrist like a bracelet, and when she kissed him, Sophie clapped so hard her pencil rolled off the table. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was theirs.